Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the live stream event to commemorate Canada's National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. We thank you so very much for joining us today. I want to acknowledge that we're joining you from the Manitoba Legislative Building, located on Treaty 1 territory and the homeland of the Métis people. We respect the treaties and the harms of the past. We remain committed to working in partnership with Indigenous people in the spirit of truth and reconciliation and in collaboration in accordance with their constitutional rights and human rights. My name is Doris May Olton. I'm chair of the Nellie McClung Foundation, and I'm honored to be your MC for this morning's events. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to Elder Billy Shribler, who will start us in a good way.
Bonjour. Bawakiki Ikweyish Nakas Ojajak Dotam. Good morning. I am Billy Shribler. I am Purple Harvest Woman. I am White Thunderbird Woman. I'm of the Crane clan. And I'm honored to be here and humbled to be here on this very important day, this National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. I know all too well the importance of this day. We lost an extended family member, my grandson's other grandmother, to domestic violence. I lost a former foster child who went missing and was later found on the outskirts of Winnipeg in a ditch, beaten and dead. This is an important day. I was 16 the first time I was struck. And I married at 19, believing that things would become better. When I would be exhausted after a day of raising babies, he would come home drunk and have his way with me. And I knew to comply because I knew the consequences were grave if I hadn't. I knew that that was not love, that that was violence. I watched family violence with my aunties, with my mother, who in the end escaped barely with her life. But I was a Gichta Ikwe. I was warrior woman. I had a strong spirit, and I knew I needed to make a better life. Is this my story? Perhaps. Perhaps it's the story of one of you. Perhaps it's the story of a family member, a friend, a neighbor. Today is an important time for us to acknowledge that there is so much violence that still continues to be perpetrated against our women, our Two-Spirit, and our trans sisters. I ask that you will join me in prayer. Creator, please come to us today in a way that helps us to honor those that we have lost and remember them because they had beautiful spirits that were diminished and we lost them in tragic ways. We ask that you will be here with us, that you will help guide those who are the decision makers. Help us to know what we need to do and work together in a good way to bring resources together, to make policies that will help protect all of those who are in those tragic ways. We ask that you will bring home our missing ones, those that are murdered and not found. We ask that they will be brought back to their homes, so that they can be reunited in their homeland. We ask that you will continue to bring voice so that no one has to be in silence, that silence can be stopped. We ask, Creator, that you will open the hearts of these women with courage and protection. We ask that you will be with us as we acknowledge and recognize this day. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Billy. Today is a day of symbols. We see the flags across the country being held at half-staff. We see red roses for the women who were murdered and white roses for peace. We see symbols around us, and we see symbols that need acknowledgement. Tobacco is one of the 4 sacred medicines of the indigenous culture, and it's an offering when a request is made. And asking Elder Shribler to lead us in prayer today was one of those symbols, a symbol of us saying, please, we are honoring your culture. Will you honor us with your words? So thank you very much for your words. Billy was presented with tobacco earlier today. And there's another really important symbol. We often wonder if we're making any progress, if things are really happening. And then there's a little flicker and we say, yes, we're moving forward. And one of those moving forwards was the election of our current premier, who is the first woman premier in the province of Manitoba. And I'd like to ask Heather Stephenson to come forward and give us a few words.
Thank you very much, Doris May, and good morning, everyone. First off, I want to thank Elder Shribler for your beautiful opening prayer and for sharing your story. Unfortunately, there's too many similar stories of too many people around the world who have suffered as a result of that. And that's part of why we're here today, to remember those individuals. Today we gather to commemorate the anniversary of the 1989 École Polytechnique massacre, in which an armed male student murdered 14 women and injured 10 others in the name of fighting feminism. Today, Canadian flags on all federal and provincial buildings are flown at half-mast. We wear ribbons to remember and as a commitment to end violence against women. As the first woman Premier of Manitoba, I am both humbled and honored to hold that title and the office. But I am also reminded of the significant work that remains to ensure we have an inclusive society where all women can build a safe, healthy, and prosperous future. More than 70% of victims of domestic homicide are women. It is important that we recognize this because recognizing it is the first step in addressing it and putting an end to it. We recognize that changes must be made collectively in our language and our actions to support and uphold victims as well as the survivors of violence. Words have power. Each of us has a responsibility to make sure that what we do, say, or write is not adding to the myths about sexual assault. Today, we also remember the women in Manitoba who have lost their lives to violence this year. There are also the women whose names are never made public, the women who are missing. Their deaths still haven't been discovered. I offer my prayers to the family and friends of these women. As a government, we are committed to taking concrete steps and working collaboratively with our community partners to respond to the calls for justice of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Every day we hear stories of women in Canada and beyond who are facing violence. But we also hear many stories of women who are survivors. And today is also about those individuals. Again, I want to thank my colleagues for joining us here today, and also for our guests. Welcome to the Manitoba Legislature. This is an important memorial. Thank you for your compassion, your wisdom, your dedication to improving the safety and well-being of our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Premier Stephenson. One is very excited when one sees the leadership that is coming and helping in the women's area. We have two ministers of status of women behind me. Both of them are friends. One has been a friend for a very, very long time and is doing a wonderful job of making the visibility of women's issues really, really prominent. Minister Cox, would you come forward, please?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Doris May and Elder Shibler, for your very kind and inspirational words today. They mean so much to all of us that are here today for this very important event. Good morning. I am honored and humbled to be here today with all of you as the minister responsible for the status of women to commemorate December the 6th, a day that has unfortunately become known as Canada's National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. Across Canada, people gather to honor the memory and lives of those 14 young women who were murdered at L'École Polytechnique de Montreal over 30 years ago, simply because they were women. The Montreal Massacre, as it is widely known, is a very sad moment in Canadian history. It was an intentional anti-feminist attack that leaves all of us wondering today why such an atrocity took place. And what actions can we take individually and collectively to ensure it never happens again? December 6th is also a time that we remember the women and girls for whom violence is a daily reality. Gender-based violence is a reality. It is a reality here in Manitoba, in Canada, and across the globe. And as the minister responsible for the status of women, I will continue to speak out against gender-based violence. Our government acknowledges that there is still more to do, and we will continue to work towards ending gender-based violence. More than 70% of the victims of domestic violence are women. The violence continues to be a brutal reality for women and their children who flee a violent household every day, and the thousands of other women who do not report their physical or psychological abuse, whether that be inside or outside their home. We will continue to support one another and renew our resolve to end all forms of gender-based violence. We will work together to advocate for change, create dialogue, and challenge notions and comments that perpetuate violence against women in our homes, workplaces, and communities. Please accept my heartfelt thank you to everyone attending this morning's event, albeit virtually, or those of us who are here in person. Together, we will remember, we will reflect, and we will continue to act. Thank you. Miigwech.
I think that the commitment to action is one of the things that we're all looking forward to. And one of the things that's happened is that there has been a gender-based violence committee of cabinet established. And those women are going to read for us today the timeline of what happened on that day, December 6th, which was so ingrained in all of our memories. Today is the National Day of Remembrance and Action on the Violence of Women. Once again, we're making this solemn anniversary and remembering the women who died tragically, lost their lives on December 6th because they were women. I recently read a report of what happened on that day 32 years ago, and it stated, at the beginning, the students thought it was a prank. It was just before Christmas, classes were about to break, and they thought, Christmas is starting early. It certainly did not for those women. We only wish that it had been a Christmas prank. The MLAs, Minister Cox, Minister Squire, isn't this good to be going down and being able to say so many women ministers? Minister Gordon and MLA Janice Morley-Lecomte are going to read a timeline of what happened on that day. Thank you.
On December 6th, after 5 p.m., the shooter entered École Polytechnique campus. His weapons were hidden in plastic bags. 5 p.m., 60 students were in a mechanical engineering class, one of the last classes of the term. 5:10, the gunman entered the classroom, holding a rifle in both hands. He said, "Everybody stop everything." He shot into the ceiling and said, "Separate the girls on the left and the guys on the right." He told the women to move to the back left corner of the classroom, and he told the men to leave the room. The students thought he was firing blanks, and this was at the end of the term this was an end of the term prank. The men left the room. The 9 women were left in the back corner of the room. He said, "Do you know why you were here?" One of the women said, "No." He said, "I am fighting feminism." He began firing from left to right. He fired approximately 30 bullets at 9 women. Then he left the room. 6 of the women were killed, and 3 were gravely injured. He entered another classroom and attempted to shoot a woman at the back of the room twice, but his weapon wasn't functioning. He left the classroom and reloaded the gun. He walked along the corridor, wounding a female student. He walked towards the financial services office, and he shot a woman in the office through a window in the door. She was killed. He took the escalator to the first floor and entered the cafeteria, where the violence continued.
At 5:20 p.m., Lepine shot a woman standing near the cafeteria kitchen. She was killed. He walked through the cafeteria, shooting in various directions. 2 students were killed. 1 was injured. He left the cafeteria and took the escalator to the 3rd floor, walking down the hallway. 5:25 p.m., Maryse Leclerc was giving a presentation on the dais. Lepine entered the room and he shot her. He then fired on 2 female students who were trying to leave through the front door of the classroom. They were killed. Several students escaped through the back door. He continued firing at the students hiding between the desks. 1 person was killed, 3 were injured.
Maurice Leclerc cried out for help. He walked to the dais and stabbed her 3 times. She was killed. He sat down on the dais. He fired the last bullet at himself. It was 5:28 p.m. Shortly thereafter, police entered the building, including the Director of Public Relations for the Montreal Police Force. He found his daughter, Maurice Leclerc, lying dead.
Less than 20 minutes had passed since the killer began shooting. 14 women were dead, killed because they were women. Genevieve Bergeron, Elaine Collin, Natalie Croteau, Barbara Deo, Anne-Marie Edward, Maurice Leclerc, Maude Auvergnat, Anne-Marie Lemay, Sonia Pelche, Michelle Richard, Annie Saint Arnaud, Annie Turcotte, Maurice Legagne, Barbara Clou-Ladinowick. Please join me in a moment of silence to honor these 14 women and all those who have been lost to gender-based violence since. Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Miigwech.
Thank you. I don't think I've ever heard that timeline before, Fred, in that way, so thank you so much. It was very, very effective. In such a short time, so many lives lost, and you have to remember the year, 89. We didn't do that in Canada. We hadn't had that kind of thing in Canada. So hearing those names and remembering the tragedy of the day is an important thing for us. We've also invited guests to bring additional perspectives on gender-based violence and how it impacts Manitobans in the newcomer and the Indigenous communities. It's now my honor to introduce Hamera Jalil, who is the Executive Director of Healthy Muslim Families. Through this organization, Hamera and her team support newcomer families and racialized women who have experienced violence and trauma. Thank you for being here.
Honorable Premier Stephenson, Minister Cox, and all the honorable dignitaries and attendees today, salam and good morning. On this day of remembrance and action on violence against women, I hold in my heart and I say a special prayer for those sisters who, as we stand here, are suffering in silence, who are brave and reach out but haven't found a way out of their violent situation yet. I know you will. You are brave, resilient, and have the power to define your own path. Know that you have friends and allies who will support you. You don't have to do this alone. As the pandemic hit, violence against women became its own pandemic. It reached proportions we had not seen before. The victims of the pandemic were unequivocally women, and sometimes newcomer and racialized women suffered much. This was not a surprise. The advocates, activists, and survivor activists saw this coming and raised their voices. Thankfully, it reached our leaders, ministers, and decision makers, and the province mobilized. I commend the province and the Manitoba Status of Women Secretariat in listening to these voices and mobilizing by setting up new services like text message crisis lines, by setting up emergency funds like the support for victims of violence and other measures. I'm also very thankful to the leaders, advocates, counselors, and other professionals who responded and are continually working to provide services like shelters and programs in our province. Healthy Muslim families also saw more women reaching out for information, for receiving counseling and support. No doubt the work is being done, but I know this: ending violence against women will require even more leadership, more action, and more investment and funding. And this leadership must come from our own communities in collaboration with government. While no community is free of abuse, the new arrivals to Canada, meaning immigrants, refugees, and particularly newcomer Muslim women, are beset by three further problems. First one, lack of understanding and awareness about their legal rights as a spouse, rights as a separated or divorced parent, legal rights as a sponsored immigrant, and lack of representation in the legal profession and justice system. Secondly, lack of a support system because they've left their family and friends back home. On top of that, lack of culturally relevant and culturally appropriate resources and programs, including lack of cultural communities-led shelters for women and children fleeing abuse. There is enough research that demonstrates that in order to really combat violence against women in any community, we need to have programs that work on reducing financial dependency of women, work on holistic empowerment programs, and reducing discrimination in employment, which are all interlinked with violence against women. From our community leaders and religious leaders, we require that they do more to teach our communities that there is no place in any religion for domestic violence. Hold violent men accountable for their actions. Violence can never be a family matter only. To educate and raise awareness, we require to have regular conversations amongst community members and regular reinforcement from our community and religious leaders. There is a lot of work to be done. From assessing awareness levels in our communities, developing readiness at the leadership levels in our communities to deal with this problem, building trust and respect in our networks, developing primary prevention programming by understanding the context, barriers, and interventions appropriate for our communities, and more importantly, to increasing capacity of organizations and professionals in our cultural communities. Finally, I want to say this. This problem is too complex to expect a community to deal with on their own. As communities, we are ready and willing. At least the women are. I encourage the government to work together with us to develop processes of consultation for effective, practical, and culturally relevant ways of combating domestic violence that will work within our spiritual and cultural context. May Allah bless you all. Thank you.
Strong calls all around us for peace, for understanding the impact of domestic violence. When this happened, people talked about a war on women, and that war had really come to the forefront now. My good friend Diane Redsky is going to come up and talk to us next about how that war is continuing. I mean, she's been the chairperson for the Urban Indigenous Working Group on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. The war continues, and it's everywhere, and it will only take our concerted collective action to see that it stops. Diane, please come forward.
Good morning. Bonjour. Shueganun Adishnakaz Adik Dodam. My spirit name is Love Eagle, and I'm from the Caribou clan, and I wish to begin by acknowledging the Treaty 1 territory and homeland of the Métis Nation that we all have the privilege of living and working on. I also acknowledge the traditional territory of my ancestors, Treaty 3, and the water that comes to Winnipeg from my community, Shoal Lake First Nation, as a really important part of the work that we do. I also wish to acknowledge the generations of survivors and family members who have been impacted by missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit LGBTQIA. This year also is 50 years since the brutal death and murder of Helen Betty Osborne. And we have so much significant work to do for Indigenous women and girls in this province. Today marks 32 years. Many of us can remember what we were doing at that time, 32 years ago, where 14 female engineering students were killed because their shooter hated feminists. As we reflect on this tragedy today, it is important we firstly acknowledge and honor these 14 women and their families. We also need to acknowledge the incredible work that has been achieved by women, for women, and for all of us to continue to use our voice, our power, and our influence to end all forms of gender-based violence. This is particularly important for Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirited LGBTQIA, who continue to experience the highest rates of violence and are harmed by systems that continue to contribute and be responsible for creating vulnerability for Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit LGBTQIA. The Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Two-Spirit Plus National Inquiry concluded that Canada carried out genocide against Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit LGBTQIA. As the chair of the Urban Subworking Group for the MMIW 2S Plus National Action Plan, I wish to commend the national leaders that came together to build that urban national action plan. The urban approach to stop this genocide and to end gender and race-based violence calls for the end of the status quo, to shifting power, decision-making, and resources to support local and grassroots initiatives, regardless of where you live. The solutions have always been wherever Indigenous people are, particularly wherever Indigenous women are. Those kitchen tables, boardrooms, around sacred fires and ceremonies, and in Indigenous-led organizations all across Manitoba. To bring this together means we must all work together co-development, and co-management is critical to this success. I wish to acknowledge as well today the work of the Two-Spirit LGBTQQ sub-working group. For the Two-Spirited LGBTQQ relatives, our urban sub-working group acknowledged as part of the National Inquiry of Missing and Murdered and Girls in the final report outlined 31 recommendations to address violence against Two-Spirit LGBTQIA people. The Two-Spirited LGBTQIA have always existed and have been part of our community. Prior to colonization, each Indigenous nation had their own unique understanding and language pertaining to Two-Spirit LGBTQIA and their roles in the community. There is evidence of Two-Spirit and traditional creation stories. The erasure of Two-Spirit LGBTQIA and the destruction of their traditional roles has resulted in increased violence and loss of recognition and acknowledgement of their gifts as visionaries, ceremonial leaders, healers, caregivers, medicine people, peacemakers, warriors, leaders, and social supports. The space they held was vital to the good of our community, and its loss over centuries of sexism, racism, homophobia, and transphobia has weakened our collective. Specific efforts on the prevention of violence to our Two-Spirited LGBTQIA relatives will also be an important cornerstone moving forward. We encourage the establishment of specific funding for Two-Spirit LGBTQIA groups. We believe specific programs and services directed to Two-Spirit LGBTQIA programs that are developed in concert with Two-Spirit LGBTQIA leadership are vital to closing the gaps in healing programs. Cultural supports must ensure the acknowledgement of Two-Spirit LGBTQIA. Historical roles in working at restoring Two-Spirit LGBTQIA to power and place will be medicine for all of us. I encourage you to read the report of the urban approach to ending violence, as well as the Two-Spirit LGBTQIA National Action Plan that is located on the website. It is undeniable there is a vital, innovative, resilient, and strong urban Indigenous presence in Manitoba. To all governments, systems, institutions, allies, private and public sectors, the time is now. This is a new starting point. Our task to work together is urgent. We have a shared responsibility for this success. Our lives literally depend on it. This ongoing national tragedy brought us together, and there is a role and responsibility for everyone, individually and collectively, to be part of the solution. Thank you for all being here today, and thank you for the work you do to end all forms of gender-based violence in Manitoba. Miigwech.
This concludes the program here in the Ledge today. There are other events happening across the city, across the province, and I urge you to participate in them. Remember these women, it's an important thing to do. It's what we can do to help stop violence against women. Remember, take action, support. It's an important thing to do. On behalf of the Manitoba Status of the Women's Secretariat and Minister Cox and her colleagues, and again, I thank you all for being here. It's wonderful. We thank you for being here today, joining us as you can. Thank you for standing with us in solidarity. Please keep standing together in solidarity. And renew our commitment, your commitment, to help end violence against women in our homes, in our workplace, in our communities. Thank you for coming today, and have a very thoughtful, reflective, and supportive day. Thank you.